Hello, my name is Sharon Marie Chester. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and board-approved clinical supervisor. I've had clinical practice treating mental illness for more than 30 years. So I want to address this issue about mass shootings and mental illness. Mental illness is not the cause for mass shootings, as is being touted by the NRA and the suck-up current occupant of the Oval Office. Okay, period. In 30 plus years of practice and thousands of clients, only once have I had to write a legal report that a psychotic client was too unstable to have access to a firearm, which I did. That has a place. That's thousands of clients, only one. Reams of research show that the mental health issue is a straw man, propped up as a fake boogeyman, easily proven false by years of empirical research. I'm going to be going over a little bit of that in as least dry form as I can. Okay, so attempting to reformat the definition of mental illness for the sake of keeping guns on the street will fail. And this video will give you some information as to why it will fail and how. The statistics for this video, by the way, were taken from 4 sources: the National Association for Mental Illness and their comparative rates, and 3 different FBI reports from 2015, 2017, and 2018. Okay, first we need to define what actually is a mental illness. Okay? Mental illness can be applied to anyone who has suffered with anxiety or depression. Those are considered mental illnesses. If you've been treated for anxiety or depression, you have had a mental illness. Okay, then what is a serious mental illness? Let's get that more clear. Okay, a serious mental illness, all serious means is that of any of those conditions that you may have had that are considered mental illness, if you became dysfunctional in some part of your life, like you were so depressed when your mother died you couldn't get out of bed for a week, that is a serious form of mental illness. Does that make you dangerous? Not so much. Okay, then let's take the term psychosis, which has more relevance in some minor way. The term psychosis includes all of the mental illness conditions where people are out of touch with reality. They have often hallucinations, either auditory or visual, or they often have delusions, which is a storyline about, aliens or deep state or any of that. And then paranoia is often engaged in that. They say neurotic people, we're all a little neurotic. We build castles in the air. Psychotic people move in. There's a difference. They're out of touch with reality. So who has mental illnesses? Okay, 20% of the United States adult public is considered to have some form of mental illness. 20%, now that's in any given year. So those could switch around from year to year. So lots of people have been treated for, have, or will have a mental illness. Does that make them dangerous? Now let's narrow this down to mass shooters. Okay, because what is the nexus, the combiner between mental illness and mass shooters? Okay, mass shooters. On the 2017 study, they had 63 mass shooters that they studied. 75% had no mental illness. 25% had some form of mental illness, but only 0.05, that's 0.05%, had a psychotic condition, which they were out of touch with reality. There's another study, I even like better, that's from 2015, examined 226 men who either committed or tried to commit mass shootings, mass killings. Only 22% could be considered mentally ill. And of those, these are the diagnoses. 12 had a mood disorder. 12 had an anxiety disorder. 2 had personality disorders. Only 3 people of those 226 men had a psychotic disorder. That's 1/100% of these mass shooters had a psychotic mental illness. So researchers point out that other countries have similar rates of mental illness, but only a fraction of the United States fatalities from shootings. The key factor here is that the United States, apart from the rest of the world, epidemiologists say, is the easy availability of guns. Okay? No real surprise to anybody. Okay, so what do they have in common? What do mass shooters have in common? These are the 6 most common traits shared by mass shooters. They are, number 1, take a look at it, a strong sense of resentment. Some people call that hate. Okay, number 1 characteristic, hate. Hate is not a mental illness. The desire for notoriety. The desire for notoriety is not a mental illness. The obsession with other shooters is not a mental illness. A history of domestic violence may or may not be involved with a mental illness. Narcissism is a trait. There are people who have narcissistic traits. There are people who have a narcissistic personality disorder, and there are people who have malignant narcissism. I think we might know one at the highest office of our land. Okay, so narcissism is in and of itself not a mental illness, although the other 2 are, the personality disorder and malignant narcissism. And finally, access to firearms is the most common trait among mass shooters, one of the 6. Let's talk about race and gender. No surprise, 94% are male, 63% are white male, or white, I shouldn't say white male, I don't have that narrowed down yet. Let's take a look at all those Middle Easterners. 3% are mass shooters, 63 are white. I think these are some interesting statistics that help us profile mass shooters for what it's worth. Okay? Interesting thing on priors. You wonder about priors and mass shooters. Like, how are these people criminals to begin with? Not what you might think. Okay? Crimes against persons. That's the only one I pulled out as far as prior convictions for mass shooters. This shows us 89% of mass shooters have 0 prior convictions of either felonies or misdemeanors. 5% of mass shooters have prior felonies. 6% have prior misdemeanors. So I don't think we need to go looking in the overly proportioned black people who have been arrested for anything in their whole lives before to find a mass shooter. That's not where to look, quite obviously. Okay, so who owns the world's guns? What is this thing about the guns? Let's take a look at this. The top civilian gun-owning countries of the world. The United States has, per 100 people in this country, we have 120.5 guns. We have more guns in this country than we have people. They're comparing us with Yemen, Serbia, Montenegro, Uruguay, Canada, Cyprus, Finland, Lebanon, and Iceland. Let me add, though, that Finland, Iceland, and Switzerland, some of the European countries, the high rate of guns ownership has to do with their having mandatory military service at the age of 18. So those people have guns. This is gun ownership, not gun violence. Okay? So United States is just ridiculously over the top in the level of guns that we provide for our civilian population. Let's look at 6 different countries. Some of these are notorious for violence. Venezuela, Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, Brazil, and guess who number 6 is? United States. These 6 countries comprise only 10% of the whole world's population, but these 6 countries combined account for 50% of gun murders. What's that tell you? Let's look at international murders by gun rate. In the United States, of all murders that occur, 73% are due to guns, firearms. England, of all the murders that are committed, only 3% are attributed to gun violence. In Canada, it's 38% of murders are attributed to gun violence. And in Australia, 13% of all murders are considered related to gun violence. Mental illness is being thrown around as the progenitor for the proliferation of mass shootings in the United States. This is simply false. Another false narrative is that there is some nexus between mass shootings, mass shooters, and violent video games. All the research points to there being a total lack of evidence that video games play any significant role whatsoever in mass shootings. This is the deal. If my son, my child, hits another child with a stick, I don't blame the stick, but I take the stick the hell away. If I have a child I know is likely to hit other children with a stick, I don't blame the stick, but I take the stick the hell away. If I have a group of children and I am unable to tell which one will hit another child with a stick, I don't blame the stick. I just don't see a reason to hand a bunch of children sticks. Children do not have a human right to a stick. No civilian should have a right to weapons of mass destruction, especially white males with a strong sense of resentment or hate issues, a desire for notoriety, an obsession with other shooters, a history of domestic violence, narcissism, and access to firearms. The bottom line is you cannot effectively profile mass shooters or intervene on their murderous activities by using mental illness as any kind of element. This is simply an NRA talking point, a false narrative intended to throw off the scent of culpability and do what they do best, which is to promote gun manufacturers. Let's not kid ourselves. We know what this is about, who's paying for what, and we need to stand up, get ourselves educated, get ourselves literate on these issues, and take it to the polls, at least, if not the streets. Again, this is Sharon Marie Chester. Thank you for listening.